Hello guys, and welcome back to Leah's Lifestyle. Today we're reading another Berkshire Hathaway's letter to shareholders. Today is the 1980s one. We've read 2 so far. We're on to number 3. Let's see. I think there's a whole bunch of them. I'm just going to check them. I have it up. No, we've read 3 so far. 1977, 1978, and 1979. Now we're on to 1980. Okay. For some reason, I already thought we had only read 2. But here we are. Okay. Let me pull it up, get it set up, and we'll just read through it like we always do. And I'll leave comments for the end. To the shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. Operating earnings improved to $41.9 million in 1980 from $36 million in 1979, but return on beginning equity capital with the securities valued at cost fell to 17.8% from the 18.6%. We believe the later yardstick to be most appropriate measure of single-year managerial economic performances. Informed use of that yardstick, however, requires an understanding of many other things that are happening on my computer. Sorry, guys. They're getting in the way of me being able to read. This is why... Fuck off. Today is not the day. Anyways, we believe the latter yardstick to the most appropriate measure of single-year managerial economic performance. Informed use of that yardstick, however, requires an understanding of many factors, including accounting policies, historical carrying values of assets, financial leverage, and industrial conditions. In your evaluation of our economic performance, we suggest that 2 factors should receive your special attention. One of a positive nature, peculiar to a large extent to our own operation, and one of a negative nature applicable to corporate performance generally. Let's look at the bright side first. Non-controlled ownership earnings. When one company owns part of another company, appropriate accounting procedures pertaining to the ownership interest must be selected from one of 3 major categories. The percentage of voting stock that is owned, in large part, determines which category of accounting principles should be utilized. Generally accepted accounting principles required, subject to exceptions, naturally, as with our former bank subsidiary. Full conditions of sales, expenses, taxes, and earnings of business holdings more than 50% owned. Blue chip stamps, 60% owned by Berkshire Hathaway, Inc., falls into that category. Therefore, all blue chip income and expense items are included in full in Berkshire's consolidated statements of earnings, with the 40% ownership interest of others in blue chips net earnings reflected in the statement as a deduction for minority interests. Full inclusion of underlying earnings from another class of holdings. Companies owed 20% to 50%, usually called investees, also normally occurs. Earning from such companies, for example, Wesco Financial, controlled by Berkshire but only 48% owned, are included via a one-line entry in the owner's statement of earnings. Unlike the other 50% categories, all items of revenue and expenses are omitted. Just the proportional share of net income is included. Thus, if Corporation A owns 1/3 of Corporation B, 1/3 of B's earnings, whether or not distributed by B, will end up in A's earnings. There are some modifications both in this and the overall 50% category for incorporated taxes and purchases price adjustments, the explanation of which we will save for a later date. We know you can hardly wait. Finally, come holdings representing less than 20% ownership of other corporations voting securities. In this case, accounting rules dictate that the owning companies included in their earnings only dividends received from such holdings. Under-distributed earnings are ignored. Thus, should we own 10% of corporations X with earnings of 10 million in 1980, we should report in our earnings, ignoring relatively minor taxes on intercorporated dividends, either A, 1 million of X declared the full 10 million in dividends, B, 500,000 if X paid out 50% or 5 million in dividends, or C, 0 if X reinvested all earnings. We impose this short and oversimplified course in accounting upon you because Berkshire's concentration of resources in the insurance field produces a corresponding concentration of its assets in companies in that third, less than 20% owned category. Many of these companies pay out relatively small proportions of their earnings in dividends. This means that only a small portion of their current earning power is recorded in our own current operating earnings. But while our reported operating earnings reflect only that dividends received from such companies, our economic well-being is determined by their earnings, not their dividends. Our holding in this third category is companies have increased dramatically in recent years as our insurance business has prospered and as securities markets have presented particularly attractive opportunities in the common stock area. The large increase in such holdings, plus the growth of earnings experienced by those particularly owned companies, has produced an unusual result, the part of our earnings that these companies retained last year, the part not paid to us in dividends, exceeded to the total reported annual operation earnings of Berkshire Hathaway. Thus, conventional accounting only allows less than half of our earnings, iceberg, to appear above the surface in plain view. Within the corporate world, such a result is quite rare, and in our case, it is likely to be reoccurring. Our own analysis of earning related differs somewhat from generally accepted accounting principles, particularly when those principles must be applied in a world of high and uncertain rates of inflation. But it's much easier to criticize that to improve such accounting rules. The inherited problems are monumental. We have owned 100% of businesses whose reported earnings were not worth close to 100 cents on the dollar to us, even though, in an accounting sense, we totally controlled their disposition. The control was theoretical. Unless we reinvested all earnings, massive deterioration in the value of assets already in place would occur. But those reinvested earnings had no prospect of earning anything close to the market return on capital. We have also owned small fractions of businesses that extraordinary reinvestment possibilities whose retained earnings had an economic value to us far in excess of 100 cents to the dollar. The value to Berkshire Hathaway of retained earnings is not determined by whether we own 100%, 50%, 20%, or 1% of the business in which they reside. Rather, the value of those retained earnings is determined by the use to which they are put and the subsequent level of earnings produced by the usage. This is true whether we determine the usage or whether managers we did not hire but did elect to join determined that usage. It's the act that counts, not the actors. And the value is in no way affected by the inclusion or non-inclusion of those related earnings in our report operating earnings. If a tree grows in a forest particularly owned by us, but we don't record the growth in our financial statement, we still own part of the tree. Our view, we warn you, is non-conventional, but we would rather have earnings for which we did not get accounting credit put to good use in a 10% owned company by a management we did not personally hire, than have earnings for which we did get credit put into projects of more dubious potential by other management, even if we are that management. We cannot resist putting here for a short commercial one usage of retained earnings we often greet with special enthusiasm when practiced by companies in which we have an invested interest in repurchases of their own shares. The reasoning is simple. If a fine business is selling in the marketplace for far less than intrinsic value, what more certain or more profitable utilization of capital can there be than significant enlargement of the interests of all owners at the bargain price? The competitive nature of corporate acquisition activities almost guarantees the payment of a full, frequently more than full price when a company buys the entire ownership of another enterprise. But the action nature of security markets often allows finely run companies the opportunity to purchase portions of their own business at a price under 50% of that needed to acquire the same earnings power through the negotiated acquisition of another enterprise. Long-term corporation results. As we have noted, we evaluate single-year corporate performance by comparing operation earnings to shareholders' equity with securities valued at cost. Our long-term yardstick of performance, however, includes all capital gains or losses, realized or unrealized. We continue to achieve a long-term return on equity that considerably exceeds the average of our yearly returns. The major factor causing this pleasant result is a simple one. The retained earnings of those non-controlled holdings we discussed earlier have been translated into gains in market value. Of course, this translation of retailed earnings into market price appreciation is highly uneven. It goes in reverse some years, unpredictable as to timing, and unlikely to materialize on a price dollar-to-dollar basis. And a silly purchase price for a block of stock in a corporation can negate the effect of a decade of earnings retained by the corporation. But when purchase prices are sensible, some long-term market recognition of the accumulation of retained earnings almost certainly will occur. Periodically, you will receive some frosting on the cake, with market appreciation far exceeding post-purchase retaining earnings. In the 6 years since present management assumed responsibilities for Berkshire, both value per share with insurance-held equities valued at market has increased from $19.46 to $400.80, or 20.5% compounded annually. You've done better. The value of the mineral content in the human body compounded at 22% annually during the past decade. It is encouraging, moreover, to realize that our record was achieved despite many mistakes. The list is too painful and lengthy to detail here, but it clearly shows that a reasonable competitive corporation batting average can be achieved in spite of a lot of managerial strikeouts. Our insurance companies will continue to make large investments in well-run, favorable situations, non-controlled companies that very often will pay out in dividends only small portions of their earnings. Following this policy, we should expect our long-term returns to continue to exceed the returns derived annually from reported operating earnings. Our confidence in this belief can easily be qualified. If we were to sell the equities that we hold and replace them with long-term tax-free bonds, our reported operation earnings would rise immediately over $30 million annually. Such a shift tempts us. Not at all. So much for the good news. Okay, that's the good news. I gotta adjust here. Okay. Results for owners. Unfortunately, earnings reported in incorporated financial statements are no longer the dominant variable that determines whether there are any real earnings for you, the owner. For only gains in purchasing power represents real earnings on investment. If you A, forego the 10 hamburgers to purchase an investment, B, receive dividends which, after tax, buy 2 hamburgers, and C, receive upon sales of your holdings after tax procedures that will buy 8 hamburgers, then D, you have no real income from your investment, no matter how much it appreciates in dollars. You may feel richer, but you won't eat richer. High rates of inflation create a tax on capital and makes much corporate investment unwise, at least if measured by the criteria of a positive real investment return to owners. This hurdle rate, the return on equity that must be achieved by a corporation in order to produce any real return for its individual owner, has increased dramatically in recent years. The average tax-paying investor is now running up a down escalator whose pace has accelerated to the point where his upward progress is null. For example, in a world of 12% inflation, a business earning 20% on equity, which very few manage consistently to do, and distribute it to all individuals in the 50% bracket is chewing up their real capital, not enhancing it. Half of the 20% will go for income tax. The remaining 10 leaves the owners of the business with only 98% of the purchasing power they possess at the start of the year, even though they have not spent a penny of their earnings. The investors in this bracket would actually be better off with a combination of stable prices and corporate earnings on equity capital of only a few percent. Explicit income taxes alone, unaccompanied by an implicit inflation tax, never can turn a positive corporate return into a negative owner return. Even if there were 90% personal income tax rates on both dividends and capital gains, some real income would be left for the owner at a zero inflation rate. But the inflation tax is not limited to reported income. Inflation rates not far from the recently experienced can turn the levels of positive returns achieved by a majority of corporations into negative returns for all owners, including those not required to pay explicit taxes. For example, if inflation reached 16%, owners of the 60% plus of corporate American earnings less than the rate of return would be realized a negative real return, even if income taxes on dividends and capital gains were eliminated. Of course, the two forms of taxation coexist and interact since explicit taxes are levied on nominal, not real, income. Thus, you pay income taxes on what would be defectives in returns to stockholders were measured in constant dollars. Would be defectives? Okay, that's a word I don't fucking know. Cool. If anyone wants to tell me what that word means, please do. I'll Google it later, but at present, inflation rates, we believe individual owners in medium or high tax brackets, as distinguished from tax-free entities such as pension funds, elementary institutions, etc., should expect no real long-term returns from the average American corporation. Even though these individuals reinvest the entire after-tax tax proceeds from the dividends they receive, the average return on equity of corporation is fully offset by the combination of the implicit tax on capital levied by inflation and the explicit tax levied both on dividends and gains in value proceeded by retained earnings. As we said last year, Berkshire has no corporate solution to the problem. We'll say it again next year too. Inflation does not improve our return on equity. Indexing is the insulation that all seek against inflation, but the great bulk, although there are important exceptions, of corporate capital is not even particularly indexed. Of course, earnings and dividends per share usually will rise if significant earnings are saved by a corporation, i.e., reinvested instead of paid as dividends. But that would be true without inflation. A thrifty wage earner, likewise, would achieve regular annual increases in his total income without ever getting a pay increase if he were willing to take only half of his paycheck in cash, his wage dividend, and consistently add the other half, his retained earnings, to a savings account. Neither this high-saving wage earner nor the stockholder is a high-saving corporation whose annual dividend rate increases while its rate of return on equity earns flat is truly indexed. For capital to be truly indexed, return on equity must rise, i.e., business earnings consistently make increase in proportions to the increase in the price level without any need for the business to add to capital, including working capital employed. Increased earnings processed by increased investments don't count. Only a few businesses come close to exhibiting this ability, and Berkshire Hathaway isn't one of them. We, of course, have a corporate policy of reinvesting earnings for growth, diversity, and strength, which has the incidental effect of minimizing the current imposition of explicit taxes on our owners. However, on a day-by-day basis, you will be subject to the implicit inflation tax, and when you wish to transfer your investment in Berkshire into another form of investment or into consumption, you also will face explicit taxes. Sources of earnings. The table below shows the source of Berkshire's reported earnings. Berkshire owns about 60% of blue chip stamps, which is turn owners 80% of Wesco Financial Corporation. The table shows aggregate earnings of the various business entities as well as Berkshire shares of those earnings. All of the significant capital gains and losses attributed to any of the businesses entitled are aggregated in the retailed secondary gains figures at the bottom of the table and are not included in operating earnings. Our calculation of operating earnings also excludes the gain from sales of mutuals branched offices. In the respect it differs from the presentation in our audited financial statement that includes this item in the calculation of earnings before realized investment gain. Okay, let's read this. Come on. Okay. So, just like the ones before, it has earning before income tax, net earnings after tax. Underneath before income tax, it has total and Berkshire shares, and in earnings after tax, it just has Berkshire shares. Underneath the before income tax total, they have 1980, 1979. Berkshire shares, 1980, 1979. In earnings after tax under Berkshire shares 1980, 1979. So each number will be the current year and the previous year. First the totals, then the shares, all before income, and then the current year that this was written, and the year after, and the earnings after tax. So I'm going to say what it is on the left, and then just go straight through the numbers like we've done the last few. It's in thousands of dollars. Total earnings, all entities, $85,945, $86,632, $70,146, $56,427, $53,122, $42,817. Okay, earnings and operation insurance groups. And then in the groups, earnings from operations, insurance groups, and then they have in the insurance groups, which is, I'm guessing, all of these. Okay. Underwritings, 6,738, 3,742, 6,737, 3,741, 3,637, 2,214. Net investment income, 30,939, 24,224, 30,927, 24,216, 25,607, 20,106. Berkshire Wambeck Textiles, negative 508, 1,723, negative 508, 1,723, 202, 848. Associated Retail Stores, 2,440, 2,775, 2,440, 2,775, 1,169, 1,280. See's Candies, 15,031, 12,785, 8,950, 7,598, 4,212, 3,448. Buffalo Evening News, negative 2,805, negative 4,617, negative 1,672, negative 2,744, negative 816, negative 1,333. Blue Chip Stamps Partners, 7,699, 2,397, 4,588, 1,425, 3,060, 1,624. Illinois National Bank, 5,326, 5,747, 5,200, 5,616, 5,614, 4,731, 5,027. Wesco Financial Parent, 2,916, 2,413, 1,392, 1,098, 1,044, 937. Mutual Savings and Loans, 5,814, 10,147, 10,447, 2,775, 4,751, 1,974, 3,261. Precision Steel, 2,833, 3,254, 1,352, 1,480, 656, 723. Interest on debt, negative 12,230, negative 8,248, negative 9,390, negative 5,860, negative 4,809, negative 2,900. Others, 2,170, 1,342, 1,590, 996, 1,255, 753. Total earnings from operations, 66,361, 57,984, 54,389, 46,813, 41,922, 35,988. Mutual savings and loans sales of branches, 5,873, 0, 2,803, 0, 1,293, 0. Realized security gains, 13,711, 10,648, 12,954, 9,614, 9,907, 6,820. And then they have the total earnings, all entities, again, like we said at the top. So overall, if you didn't understand, mostly in 1980, they had a positive income adjustment to everything that was happening, except for in a few things where they had some negative numbers go up, and in a thing that they bought, some negative numbers go down, which was a positive thing. Blue chip stamps and Wesco are public companies with reporting requirements of their owners. On page 40 to 53 of this report, we have reproduced the narrative reports of the principal executives of both companies, in which they describe 1980 operations. We recommend a careful reading and suggest that you particularly note the superb job done by Lois Vincenti and Charlie Munger in responding to repositioning mutual savings and loans. A copy of the full annual report of either company will be mailed to any Berkshire shareholder upon request to Mr. Robert H. Bird of Blue Chip Stamps, 5801 South Eastern Avenue, Los Angeles, California, 940, or to Miss Bet Becker for Wesco Financial Corporation, 815 East Colorado Boulevard, Pasadena, California, 91109. As indicated earlier, undistributed earnings in companies we do not control are now fully as important as the reported operating earnings detailed in the preceding table. The distributed portion, of course, finds its way into the table primarily through the net investment income section of insurance group earnings. We show below Berkshire's proportional holds on these non-controlled businesses for which only distributed earnings dividends are included in our earnings. Okay. And then it has number of shares, the name of the company, cost, and market. All right. 434,550 A, affiliate public income, 2,821, 12,222. 464,317 A, aluminum company American, 25,577, 27,685. 475,217 B, Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company, 12,942, 15,894. 1,983,812 B, General Foods Inc., 62,507, 59,885. 89. 7,200,000 A, Geico Corporations, 47,138, 105,300. 2,015,000 A, Handy and Harmon, 21,825, 58,435. 711,180 A, Interpublic Group of Companies Inc., 4,531, 22,135. 1,211,834 A, Kaiser Aluminum and Chemical Corp., 20,629, 27,569. 282,500 A, Media General, 4,545, 8,334. 247,039 B, National Detroit Corporation, 5,930, 6,299. 881,500 A, National Students Market, 5,128, 5,895. 391,400 A, Agilva and Mather Inc., Intel Inc., 3,709, 9,981. 3,788. B. Pinkerton's Inc. 12,144, 16,489. 245,700. B. R.J. Reynolds Industries. 8,702, 11,228. 1,250,525. B. Safeco Corporations. 32,062, 45,177. 151,104. B. The Times Mirror Company. 4,447, 6,271. 1,868,600. A. The Washington Post Company. 10,628, 42,277. 666,124. B. E.W. Woolworth Company. 13,583, 16,511. All other common stockholds comes to, they have the total number of costs here, but the all other common stocks is 26,313, 32,096, and then the total with the total costs of before, total cost being 325,161, 529,687 being the market. And then they say here that the A's stand for all owned by Berkshire or its insurance subsidiaries, B being blue chip or Wesco owned shares of the companies. All numbers represented Berkshire's net interest in the large gross holdings of the group. From this table, you can see that our sources of underlying earnings power are distributed far differently among industries that would superficially seem the case. For example, our insurance subsidiaries own approximately 3% of Kaiser Aluminum and one-fourth of Alco. Our share of the 1980 earnings of those companies amounts to about $13 million. If translated dollar for dollar into a combination of eventual market value gain and dividends, this figure would have to be reduced by a significant, but not precisely determinable, amount of tax. Perhaps 25% would be fair assumption. Thus, we have a much larger economic interest in the aluminum business than in practically any of the operation businesses we control and on which we report to more detail. If we maintain our holdings, our long-term performance will be more affected by the future economics of the aluminum industry than it will by direct operations discuss decisions we make concerning most companies over which we exercise managerial control. Geico Corporations. Our largest non-controlled holding is 7.2 million shares of Geico's Corp., equal to about 33% equity interest. Normally, an interest of this magnitude over 20% would qualify as an investee holding and would require us to reflect a proportion share of Geico's earnings in our own. However, we purchased our Geico stock pursuant to special orders of the District of Columbia and New York Insurance Departments, which requires that the right to vote the stock be placed with an independent party. Absent the vote, our 33% interest does not qualify for investee treatment. Pinkerton's is a similar situation. Of course, whether or not the undistributed earnings of Geico are picked up annually in our operating earnings figure has nothing to do with their economic value to us or to you as owners of Berkshire. The value of these retained earnings will be determined by the skill with which they are put to use by Geico's management. On this score, we simply couldn't feel better. Geico's represents the best of all investment worlds, the coupling of a very important and very hard to duplicate business advantage with the extraordinary management whose skills in operations are matched by skills in capital allocation. As you can see, our holdings cost us $47 million, with about half of this amount invested in 1976 and most of the remainder invested in 1980. At the present dividend rate, our reported earnings from Geico amount to a little over $3 million annually, but we estimate our share of this earning power is on the order of $20 million annually. Thus, undistributed earnings applicable to this holds alone may amount to 40% of total report operation earnings of Berkshire. We should emphasize that we feel as comfortable with Geico management retaining an estimated $17 million of earnings applicable to our ownership as we would if that sum were in our own hands. In just the last 2 years, Geico, through repurchasing of its own stock, has reduced the share equivalents it has outstanding from 34.2 million to 21.6 million, dramatically enhancing the interests of shareholders in a business that simply can't be replaced. The owners could not have been better served. We have written in past reports about the disappointments that usually result from purchase and operation of turnaround businesses. Literally hundreds of turnaround possibilities in dozens of industries have been described to us over the years, and either as participants or as observers, we have tracked performance against expectations. Our conclusion is that, with few exceptions, when a management with a reputable reputation for brilliance tackles a business with a reputation for poor fundamental economics, it is the reputation of the business that remains intact. Geico may appear to be an exception, having been turned around from the very edge of bankruptcy in 1976. It certainly is true the managerial brilliance was needed for its restoration, and that Jack Barney, upon arrival in that year, supplied that ingredient in abundance. But it also is true that the fundamental business advantage that Geico had enjoyed, an advantage that previously had produced staggering success, was still intact with the company, although submerged in a sea of financial operation troubles. Geico was designed to be the low-cost operation in an enormous marketplace, auto insurance, populated largely by companies whose marketing structures restructured adaptation. Run as designed, it could offer unusual value to its customers while earnings usually returned for itself. For decades, it had been run in just this manner. Its troubles in the mid-70s were not produced by any diminution or disappearance of this essential economic advantage. Geico's problem at the time put it in a position analogous to that of American Express in 1964, following the salad oil scandal. Both were one-of-a-kind companies, temporarily reeling from the effects of a financial blow that did not destroy their exceptional underlying economics. The Geico and American Express situations, extraordinary business franchises with localized exuberant cancer, needing, to be sure, a skilled surgeon, should be distinguished from the true turnaround situation in which the manager expected and need to pull off a corporate Pygmalion. Whether the appellation, we are delighted with our Geico holdings, which, as noted, cost us $47 million to buy a similar $200 million of earning power in the business with first-class economic characteristics and bright prospects could cost a minimum of $200 million, much more in some industries. If it had to be accomplished through negotiation purchase of an entire company, a 100% interest of that kind gives the owner the option of leveraging the purchase, changing management direction, cash flow, and selling the business. It may also provide some excitement around corporate headquarters, less frequently mentioned. We find it perfectly satisfying that the nature of our insurance business dictates we buy many minority portions of already well-run businesses at price for far below our share of the total value of the entire business that do not need management change, redirection of cash flow, or sales. There aren't many Jack Barons in the managerial world or Geico in the business world. What could be better than buying into a partnership with both of them? Goodness. Think we've been going for some time here, and there's a lot. I think I might. I'm deciding right now. I think I'm gonna stop it there. I have some stuff I have to do, and I think it's going to. This is a longer one than usual, so don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below. Should I break these up a little bit more? They're quite long and lengthy. I think I might have to. Till next time, guys.